Hello, this is Tony Hiller from RealClimateScience.com. Vanity Fair says that New York and the eastern seaboard are going to drown if we don't stop using fossil fuels.
We interrupt this feed to bring you news about the climate. This is Josh Fox.
Every New York City neighborhood you'll see in this video will be underwater if we don't stop climate change.
There's no room left in the atmosphere for greenhouse gases. The sad thing is, we just opened 23 million new acres in the Gulf of Mexico for offshore drilling, and we have 300 new frac gas power plants being proposed in the United States alone. You can either have the 300 frac gas power plants and all the pipelines and the 2 million new fracking wells to supply it, or the eastern seaboard. Can't have both. It means a vigorous transition to renewable energy right now, getting off of fossil fuels right now. That's the only thing that we can do to save this city and save much of the cities on the eastern seaboard.
There's a lot of imagery available on the internet showing what Manhattan will look like after sea level rises and the city drowns. Here's some very similar imagery from 1934. Will melting icebergs engulf the world? It's very easy to sell the idea that man's sins will cause a great flood because people have been raised with that idea since childhood. What has changed is that propagandists now use the concept of carbon sins rather than actual sins. In 1988, NASA's James Hansen, who started the global warming scare before Congress that summer, also predicted that the West Side Highway of Lower Manhattan would be underwater within 20 or 30 years. But Google Earth imagery shows that there's been no change of the West Side Highway coastline over the last 30 years. There is no indication that Lower Manhattan is drowning. In 1995, the New York Times predicted that most of the beaches on the east coast of the United States would be gone by the year 2020. The beaches are still there, and tide gauges show that there's been no change in the rate of sea level rise on the east coast over the last century. The tide gauge at Boston, Massachusetts shows a straight line. If sea level rise was accelerating, we would see an upwards curvature, which does not exist. And it's the same story at Atlantic City, New Jersey. There's no evidence that the rate of sea level rise has accelerated. The rate of sea level rise now at Baltimore is the same as it was 120 years ago. At Lower Manhattan, sea level is rising at the same rate now as it was when Abraham Lincoln was president. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration made some forecasts for sea level rise based on different levels of global warming. Actual sea level rise has been lower than their lowest projection. There's no scientific evidence that New York is drowning or that it will drown any time in the foreseeable future. I posted this graph on Twitter earlier and got this quite predictable reaction. Look at it. Sea level is very slightly less than predicted, but if you take the graph seriously, then we haven't reached the point where it starts to take off. I suppose there's a brain in there somewhere, but finding it might involve an electron microscope. I was hoping that some arrogant climate alarmist would take the bait. The current graph shows the scenarios diverging after the year 2020. But prior versions of the same graph showed the scenarios diverging after the year 2000. What happened was that after their predictions failed, they just pushed them out 20 years. And their new predictions are failing as well, just as badly as they did 20 years ago. They keep moving the goalposts and they keep failing over and over again. Now let's look at one segment from the Vanity Fair video.
There's no room left in the atmosphere for greenhouse gases. The sad thing is, we just opened 23 million new acres in the Gulf of Mexico for offshore drilling, and we have 300 new frac gas power plants being proposed in the United States alone. You can either have the 300 frac gas power plants and all the pipelines and the 2 million new fracking wells to supply it, or the eastern seaboard. Can't have both.
He said there's no room left in the atmosphere for greenhouse gases. He is apparently unaware that in New York City in the summertime, 99% of the greenhouse gases in the air are water vapor rather than carbon dioxide. The oppressive humidity in New York City in the summertime is caused by greenhouse gas water vapor. The amount of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere varies by a huge amount from day to day and from season to season. He also seems to be unaware of the fact that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere now are close to the lowest they've been in the last 600 million years. The greatest expansion of life on Earth occurred 540 million years ago when carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were 15 times higher than they are now. What Josh Fox and Vanity Fair are targeting is a reliable supply of energy. And they're using nonsensical arguments about climate and sea level which have no historical or scientific basis. Getting rid of our reliable supply of energy would cause the collapse of civilization, and it would have no impact on sea level rise. Democrats keep promising that sea level is going to rise and drown the coastal cities, but they never deliver on their promises. Toto's been pulling back the curtain on this climate scam for the past 15 years. You can visit him, Kyrie, Caesar, Toki, Upala, and the 4 new puppies on the web at realclimatescience.com.